This is Hannibal here from the HannibalTV.com. And today I'm doing an interview of somebody I've been looking forward to interviewing for a long time now. He was part of the Big Time Memories podcast, which I'll let him tell you how you can look up the retro episodes of that. He used to manage the Sheik. He worked with the Sheik behind the scenes. And the Sheik is one of my all-time favorite wrestlers, WWE Hall of Famer. But Supermouth Dave Drason is with us. How are you today, sir?
Fantastic. Thanks for having me, Dev. Much appreciated.
It's a pleasure. And what stands out to me as soon as you came on is that wonderful Sheik painting in the background that I'm actually very jealous of that. I wish I had that in my house.
Yeah, that was a present I received from superstar Billy Graham. I can't believe, how he captured just the essence of the Sheik, and just a beautiful collectible I have that I'll never get rid of.
I actually asked him to do one of the Sheik for me in the past, but unfortunately I had him do a flower and a rhino first because he really wanted to draw those. And a bird. Actually, I had him do a bird too. And then he got too much arthritis in his hands and he couldn't paint anymore. So you're truly blessed to have that.
Yeah, very few guys out there. I know he did one for Terry Funk. I think he did one for the Iron Sheik. But
Ric
I don't
Flair.
think he's done too many, wrestling portraits. So it's a rarity.
He did one for Brie Bella too, and Bella took a picture with it. So yeah, there's very few people. So you're blessed with that. But I guess to start this off, I know you were a fan of the Sheik before you ever met him. And fans, by the way, this podcast today is going to be mostly about the Sheik, although Dave could talk forever about his wrestling experiences, but I know the Sheik is a popular subject on this channel. So what is your very first memories of seeing this legend?
It would have to be probably early 1960s. I got into wrestling because my family owned a two-story home in east side of Detroit. And early 1960, Leaping Larry Shane, probably the most famous wrestler at the time in Detroit, moved upstairs from us. And just one day I was watching Motor City Wrestling and he's on there and it's like, holy Jesus, my neighbor upstairs, is on TV and he's a wrestler. What's this wrestling thing all about? And then, I just started watching it every week, and, every so often I'd see the Sheik on Motor City Wrestling, and, I just hated him. Then I started watching CKLW Channel 9 out of Windsor, which was the Big Time wrestling show. And they had all the guys back then. This is before the Sheik bought the territory. And, you had guys like Boba Brazil and Mark Lewin and Killer Carl Cox and Dr. Jerry Graham, all the icons of professional wrestling worked here. And, when I first started watching, of course, when you first start watching wrestling, you gravitate toward the baby faces. And Boba Brazil and Mark Lewin were my favorite. And just over time, and I think it was Mark Lewin that switched me over to the heel side. And if I could tell that quick story, Mark Lewin was going against the Sheik at Cobo Arena one day. And I'm like 12, 13 years old. I was a young kid. And I had bought a pen and pencil set, from my own money. It wasn't expensive, but still. And I wrapped it up. And George Cannon, who I knew, I had told him that I had a gift for Mark Lewin. So he went in the dressing room, told Mark Lewin to come out. Mark Lewin came out, and I gave him this pen and pencil set, and I wished him, good luck against the Sheik that night. And, he said, thanks. And then it was like a couple weeks later when I saw George, he says, hey, did you give, Mark Lewin a gift, a little gift thing? I said, yeah. He said, well, he threw it in the garbage. And it's like, you're kidding. So from that day on, it's like, why should I, like Mark Lewin or Bobo Brazil, who was a favorite. Even we had a black maid at our house when I was young. And, she would always want to watch Bobo. So it's like me and her would sit there when wrestling was on and we watched Bobo. But then, once the Mark Lewin episode happened, it's like I gravitated toward the heels, the Sheik and, Dr. Jerry Graham, Pampero Firpo, all those greats.
So you mentioned going live there and giving the pencil set to Mark Lewin. What was it like being there live when you first started going as a kid?
It was electric. There's always, a good crowd on hand, anywhere from 7 to 9,000, rarely did they sell out back in the early to late 60s. Could you excuse me for a second? I got to answer.
Yeah, no problem.
Hello? Triple H. Huh? What? Yeah, I'm interviewing with him right now, Hannibal. Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, if you want me to manage, come to your territory. There's only one guy I'm going to manage who deserves to be there, and that's Hannibal. It's me and him or nothing. Nothing? Screw you then. You and your father-in-law. Sorry about that.
That's too bad. I think that would be a little bit too extreme for the WWE these days.
Yeah, what? Me or you? Or both of us? We'd both take over.
Both. Because all the tricks that the Sheik used to use.
That's right. And him with the fire and his camel clutch and his cobra clutch. He had, he did so many different things that, watching him at Kobo, just as a young kid, just the crowds were just electric. I mean, they, enjoyed all the other bouts, they got into them, but everybody couldn't wait for the Sheik to come on, even though, 99% of the crowd hated him. What can I say? Back in the day, everybody, some of the young, jabronis online, talked down about the Sheik, about his 2, 3, 4-minute matches. But in the, 60s, when I first started going, there was a number of times he'd do, 1-hour draws and, 45 minutes. And, it was rare to see him only go, 3 to 4 or 5 minutes at that time. Those are just, magical times, and I'll never forget them.
What was a typical feud like for him? Because I understand usually he would face a guy in 3 or 4 match series.
Oh, of course. Just for an example, he would team with Wild Bull Curry against Mark Lewin and Bobo. And at some point in the match, they had a falling out. And the next thing the next, Kobo show is the Sheik versus Bull Curry. So the first one, they double count out. They'd come back with it again, and somehow they both got disqualified. And the third time they'd come, a Texas death match or a cage match or something like that. And that was typical with all of them. He'd do runs with most of the guys 2 or 3 times, and then there every so often, like Dory Funk Jr. would come in, or let's see, the Oklahoma Kid. Just Lou Klein, they had their one-off kind of, Sheik, basically took care of them, give them a payoff because they were in the main event.
And of course, he also had that run in WWE, what it's known as now, but back when it was WWF against Bruno San Martino. I don't know if you saw much of that or not, but I'm sure you must have talked to him about it over the years. What were his thoughts on the New York territory?
Well, not that I seen any of it live. Back in those, days pre-internet, I had, pen pals, friends in different cities like Burton Cutler in Philadelphia, and people in Baltimore, and John Arezzi in New York, and just all over the East Coast territory. And they'd send me the program from the Sheik versus Bruno. So even though I didn't see it live, or, there was no videotape of that kind of stuff back then either. I was up on, what happened. And I know, Sheik going into New York, that's when Vince McMahon Sr. was running things. And they had a decent relationship up until the time, they had a falling out of some sort that, I was never privy to. But, he went back, I think the last time he was there was back in the late 60s, 69, against Bruno. And then, Bruno came to Detroit a couple of times. I know one time Sheik versus Bruno at Cobo Arena, they had a double disqualification fighting outside the ring. And just because I knew Bruno through Georgianne Orsi or Georgianne Macassian, or I never knew her, second name, but she introduced me to Bruno many years ago. And whenever I'd go to Pittsburgh, I'd see him there. So, after the Sheik Bruno bout, I saw him in the dressing room, and he asked, if I could take him back to the hotel, which was only like 6 blocks from Cobo Arena. So on the way back, he says, would you like to go to dinner? So I says, fine. So we went to, I think it was called Chin Tiki, a Chinese place, and just discussing stuff over, dinner. And he didn't kayfabe me at all or anything like that. But he had told me that after, that bout that night, they were going to come back again in 2 weeks. And he says, let me tell you something, but don't, repeat it, that you heard it from me, but I'm not going to show up. And the reason he said was, Sheik promised him a payoff of $2,000. And then when he got his check from Joyce Farhat at the end of the night, it was only $800. So he held that against the Sheik ever since then, never came back. And, to dig into the Sheik just a little bit, further, when Dick the Bruiser's promotion came in 1971 and tried to run opposition against the Sheik at the Olympia Stadium, I think after the first year, so it would have been 1972, Bruno came in and worked with the Bruiser's promotion to try to, go against the Sheik. So Bruno and Sheik's relationship, from, I'll say, 71, 72 on, just wasn't, a good one.
I heard that the Sheik won that feud every time there was a head-to-head show. And at that point in time, when the Bruiser was trying to invade the territory was getting some of the biggest crowds in the world between the two companies. Do you recall that?
Oh yeah, no doubt about it. I think starting 1972, I think it was 6 or 8 sellouts, Cobo Arena in a row, and they were turning fans away outside. And at that time, Bruiser was drawing maybe 2,000 to 4,000. There was a couple shows that he had that he may have drawn up to 6. I think that was the biggest show that he ever had, was maybe 6,000. So a sellout with the Sheik at 12,500 at Cobo, 6,000 for Bruiser at Olympia. In one Saturday night in Detroit, 18,500 fans watched wrestling.
That is very, very impressive. As far as you mentioned, Sheik stiffed him on the payoff. Do you think that's because he didn't draw as well as the Sheik thought, or do you think the Sheik just had other things that he wanted to spend the money on and purposely ripped him off like that?
I think it was a purpose ripoff, because the house was, I think, I don't know the exact figure, but it was over 10,000. But the one thing about Bruno coming into Detroit was not a lot of fans knew who he was. I mean, he was big on the East Coast and everything, but even when the promotional war started and the NWA was, sending talent in, and a lot of the other promoters who were wrestlers as well, were coming in to help the Sheik out. I mean, guys like Mil Mascaris and Eddie Graham and Gorilla Monsoon, just, all guys who had never appeared in the territory before. So when they came here, for a number of us fans, Oh, it was great. We knew these guys, from magazines and seeing them, if we went to other territories. But I'll say 90% of the Detroit crowd had no idea who these people were. They only knew the Detroit guys. They didn't read the magazines. They didn't follow wrestling outside of this area. So a lot of those guys, they were working mid card and stuff like that. Fans enjoyed the match. They put on good matches, but they had no idea who they were. And the same goes for when Bruno came in against the Sheik. Most fans had no idea who Bruno was. So, that may have hurt him in a way. But then again, to get to your point, I think it was just more of a, Detroit screw job on the payoff.
Speaking of that, no gimmicks guy had a question, and I'd never heard of this kind of stuff until recently. But he says, "Is it true regarding the mythology that the Sheik would claim his box office had been robbed multiple times?" I mean, you are in Detroit, which is not known to be a low crime place. But did you hear about any of this?
Oh yeah, me and Terry Sullivan did on one of our big time memory show. We tackled this whole issue, and the thing to have the Sheik's name associated with the box office robbery is not true. It was all perpetrated by his son Eddie Farhat Jr. And what ended up happening, I wasn't there at the time. I was off managing, in Canada with George Cannon. His Superstars of Wrestling at the time. But the Funks had come in, Gary Hart had come in, they were trying to help the Sheik, build the territory back up because crowds had really dwindled, down to, 3,000, maybe 4,000 tops. So they were trying to rebuild the territory. So he was bringing in these guys. So what happened, after the show was over, Joyce Farhat had already left. And Eddie Farhat Jr. come bursting in the dressing room, and Terry Sullivan was standing there with Terry Funk and Dory Funk, and a couple other photographers, Brian Buchanan, rest his soul, who just passed away this past week, and Brad McFarland. They were in the dressing room, and they saw this too. Eddie Farhat Jr. comes busting in and goes, "Oh, the box office has been robbed. The box office has been robbed." Terry and the Funks look at each other and go, what? Really? So it was, Eddie Farhat Jr. who perpetrated that whole scheme. Joyce Farhat had already left. She wasn't involved in it. And you can't involve the Sheik in it either because he was down in Louisville, Kentucky that night against Andre the Giant, I believe it was. So he wasn't even there. So he didn't even know. And if the Sheik was there, that would have never have happened. So take away the Sheik's name with any kind of box office robbery. It was his son who was a con man and a goof, Eddie Farhat Jr.
And I could understand it as a promoter myself. Like, you'd kill the chances of getting these stars to come back and wrestle for you in the long term just to make the short bonus in the box office from ripping them off the one night. So it wouldn't even make any sense to do that.
Yeah. I mean, the final year of big time wrestling in Detroit was October of 1980. And it had just hit rock bottom then. The Sheik, sorry to say, the fans were tired of his 2-3 minute matches at that time that he was doing from like 1975 on. The talent that he was bringing in was just nobody. He had some older guys that came in that couldn't get a job anywhere else at the time, like Ox Baker and Stan Stasiak and Don Kent. And then, the rest of the talent on the card was just, not good. And even, a little bit earlier before the promotion folded, I mean, he even had Eddie Farhat Jr., his son, started wrestling as Captain Ed George. And what a joke that was. But in one respect, some of the fans liked him. He drew a little bit of money. but he just didn't look like a wrestler. He was a puncher and a kicker. Just embarrassing.
Now, Captain Ed George, for those that remember, was in the I Like to Hurt People movie. That was my first exposure to the Sheik, renting that movie in the early 90s from a video store. And you mentioned that the promotion pretty much closed around 1980. That movie came out in 1985, I believe. So when would that footage have been recorded?
1978, I think, was most of it. 77, 78, when Bruiser, was working for the Sheik then, and Sheik was working in Bruiser's territory a little bit. They brought in Dusty Rhodes, and Andre the Giant was here. So they were doing this filming, and it was supposed to be a whole different movie, and not even a whole different title also, which I can't remember because I wasn't around. But when it came out, and I think it was 84 or 85, it was just haphazardly put together, and just to get that footage out there. The producers, who were footing most of the money, they had all this footage and didn't know what to do with it. So they just came out with this, I Like to Hurt People. And I heard they're going to be doing a part 2. I think the producer had all this other footage, and he's, right now putting together a part 2. I don't think it'll be a actual movie, but more bits and pieces, or a documentary on probably the making of I Like to Hurt People.
Yeah, what I remember from that movie is I'd never seen that type of violence before in wrestling. I remember the first time I rented it, my grandmother and I used to watch wrestling together, and she took it out of the VCR because she thought it was too violent, brought it back to the video store, and the manager actually said, well, if it's not appropriate for you, it's not appropriate for this store. And I remember he took the ribbon and pulled it out and threw the tape in the garbage. And it was just such a memorable moment for me that ever since then, I was like, I got to see this movie. And a couple years later, I found it at another video store. But it was just an interesting memory to see my grandmother so shocked by the violence that she didn't want me to watch it. And she was never like that with WWE.
Well, that's great. Even though, and the manager of the store ripping the tape out, that's even the better part of the story. I mean, the Sheik's probably laughing his behind off upstairs right now at that story.
Yeah, and I did notice in a lot of those crowds, particularly in the Ed George matches, where sometimes the ring was just lit, but when you could see the audience a bit, it didn't seem like the greatest audiences by that time. So I don't know if the footage was from a long period of time in between, because some of the crowds look bigger than ever, but it definitely seemed to be done in the dying days, as you mentioned.
Well, if you look at, any kind of photographs, or, if there's any video footage from, Cobo Arena pre 1975, that ring was huge. It was an old, owned by Cobo Arena, and it was a boxing ring. So I think it was like 20 by 20. It's like 24 by 24. It was just huge. And guys hated working in that ring because just if they go bouncing off the ropes, they're going to get blown up after, first or second time that they go, because the ring was so big. And I guess, money wise, I'm sure that, Cobo Arena charged them to put up that ring, in part of their, payment. So I'm sure that, they stopped doing that, and the Sheik brought in his own ring, which was a lot smaller, that he would use on spot shows. So if you see the ring posts and stuff that are in red and the ring apron in red, that's, one of the older rings that he used, and it was a lot smaller.
Now, as far as that match that they talk about at the end of I Like to Hurt People, I forget what hotel it's at, but they're saying that there's going to be some match on top of a hotel. Did that ever happen?
No. Uh, I don't remember that part of the movie, but all the boys used to stay at the Sheridan Cadillac Hotel downtown. They always got a good rate there, and it was a first class hotel. Unless you were a guy like Bull Curry who liked to save money, and he always stayed at the American Hotel, which was like $5 a night, and it was flea infested and roaches and everything. But Bull Curry, he liked to save money, and he even at a hotel in downtown Toledo that Bull Curry used to stay at, he'd never stay in the room. He'd give them like $2-3 and he would sleep in the janitor's closet. And they had a rate at that hotel that was called the Bull Curry rate. And that's what you would get. You would get like a little mattress in the cleaning closet or something.
That's amazing. And he was a big star at one point in time, sleeping in the janitor's closet. But it seems fitting looking at him.
Yeah. And even like Terry Sullivan, told me about the time that they were in a tour in Alaska. And, this would have been 1973. And that's when they were building the pipeline. And the Sheik took big time wrestling to Alaska to entertain the people, building the pipeline. And the very first day at the hotel, Bull Curry was sharing a room with somebody, and it was like $35 a night, and his half was like $17.50. He went to another hotel. He says, "I'm not paying $17.50 a night." Boy, could you imagine, finding a good hotel, $35 a night these days?
Yeah, no, there's the Red Roof Inns are pretty cheap, but overall hotels are a lot more expensive, I find anyways. So as far as you personally having that friendship and working relationship with the Sheik, when did that start to come to fruition?
1970. I'm sure he had to notice me sitting, in my front row seated Kobo taking pictures. I'm, sure that he didn't know my name or anything, but I'm sure he recognized me, that I was always there. But in 1970, the promoter in Cincinnati, Les Ruffin, who I was really good friends with, and he knew I liked to take pictures and stuff. And prior, 1969, 1970, I used to travel to St. Louis a lot. And Sam Muchnick would let me, I was like one of the very rare people who ever got the photograph up at the ring at the Kiel Auditorium. My good friend who I used to stay with in St. Louis, Don and Judy Wilson, Don was working for Sam at the time. And, Sam, he introduced me to Sam, and, Sam knew that I was a writer and stuff because he saw my stuff in all the wrestling magazines at the time, and he allowed me to shoot photographs up at the ring, and that was a good thing for me. And I'd come back home, and I'd tell Les, yeah, I was in St. Louis, and Sam Muchnick said to give us a regard, say hello, and I relate to him that Sam let me take pictures up at the ring, and he goes, well, in Cincinnati or his show in Dayton, he says, yeah, if you come down here, you shoot up at the ring. So I know the first time it was Sheik against, I think it was Tex McKenzie. I may be wrong on that, but I'm up at the ring in Cincinnati, shooting ringside. And, a photographer at the ring, he's got to notice who you are. And so then he'd see me in Dayton. Then a couple of weeks later, he'd see me in Cincinnati again, or a month later, or in Cleveland, because I knew Johnny Powers, and he let me shoot up at the ring. Well, when the promotional war first started, all these big name guys were coming in, like I said, Mascaris and Monsoon and Eddie Graham and just everybody from, Sputnik Monroe. I had to find a way to go shoot this at Cobo Arena because that was their first really big show that they were putting on during the promotional war. So I had my Wrestling Review press pass. So I asked one of the guards if they can, pass this along to Joyce Farhat. So Joyce Farhat come met me, and I showed her the pass, and Les Ruffin vouched for me. And from this been sometime in 1970, I got to shoot up at the ring at Cobo. The next week, I showed them my photographs. They asked if they can buy them and use them in the body press program. And I said, yes. Can I shoot up at the ring again? So from that day on, I was like, the ringside photographer for them. And it wasn't until maybe the third or fourth time that I had, taken photographs there that I was in the office, Joyce Farhat's little office in Cobo Arena. And I had my pictures with me, and she's looking through them. So it's me and her sitting there, and the Sheik walks in, and it's like he took a double take, sort of knew who I was, but he kayfabed me. He didn't say anything, and he just turned around and walked out. And it was maybe the very next week or the following 2 weeks, I can't remember which one it was, that he got a new belt made. And that's when I'm in the dressing room one day, and he issues me to come over, and he asked if I would take pictures with him in the new belt. So that was like the very first time. And the Sheik, you walked on eggshells around that guy. He was unpredictable. If he liked, everybody says if he liked you, you were like a piece of the family with him. If he didn't like you, just stay your distance. And I was one of those lucky ones that he liked, and he took me in, and I had dinner with him a number of times, and Greektown and downtown Detroit, and I'd go up to the house, I'd go up to the office and do stuff. So I was very fortunate to be on his good side, and there was times that I'm gonna go down to Dayton or Cincinnati for a show, or Lima, Ohio, somewhere down there. And, instead of driving, he says, no, just meet us in Williamston, and you're going to ride in, my limo with me. So, I got to ride in the limo with them. And sometimes it was Mike Lauren driving that thing, or Jesse Ortega. But, just being in there and talking, and we just didn't talk wrestling either. He was, and I'm like, at the time, I'm like a 17-year-old kid. I'm still wet behind the ears. But, our conversations where he wanted to know, my schooling, and, and we hit it off in a way because both of us were Catholic. Just so many different things that we would talk about other than wrestling. And then I would tell him about my, adventures out to St. Louis and LA, working out there. Because when I went out to work in the wrestling office in LA in 1973 for a couple months, he called Mike LaBelle and, said, hey, this is my guy, take care of him. And when, I got to LA, Mike LaBelle just treated me like, I was, just royalty. I was able to, Don Wilson and myself, we lived in one of Mike LaBelle's houses in Beverly Hills. And then like a month, I was there for the first month, and then he ended up selling the house to some doctor. And so he moved us into his beach house in Malibu, this apartment, that he had in Malibu. So I was taken care of, great by Mike LaBelle. And I'm sure, the Sheik had a lot of influence with that.
Yeah, that sounds like a pretty nice gig. As far as him talking normally to you, do you recall the first time he kind of broke kayfabe with you, and were you shocked about it, or was it a gradual thing that you would see little bits of his real personality here or there, and eventually he just opened up more and more?
Yeah, my first interactions with him would be when I'd be photographing at Cobo Arena, and I'd be there early. I'd be there, about 7 o'clock, 6:30, 7 o'clock for an 8 o'clock show. And I'm in the dressing room, and, I'm talking with the other boys, and, I'm, new guys that would come in that I would take, post pictures. And then I started writing the body press, and, they gave me free reign of what I can write. They just, didn't say, write a thing about this guy or this guy, this guy. I just took it upon myself and sat at home on my bed with a little typewriter and just would write out these fictional stories that, that would appear in the body press. And it's like they wouldn't know, what I had written until it was published and they were selling it at, the arena, and they'd be, flipping through it and stuff. And, every so often the Sheik would say, "Hey, where did you come up with this idea?" And it's like, I don't know. It just pops into my head. And then sometimes they'd work a stupid angle around that stuff. It's like, say, Killer Brooks. I wrote this piece on him, and I had, said in the article that somehow this guy's got to be crazy. And then out of nowhere at Coba Arena that night, people started chanting Crazy Brooks. So that's how they sort of, used his name, Crazy Brooks, and, in a lot of promos and things like that, just by something stupid that I wrote in the Body Press program.
Would the Sheik usually go on last, or would he be more like Hulk Hogan, like going on before intermission and then have a longer match on last?
No, he never went on before intermission at all. Most of the times he was the final bout. The only times I can think of that he wasn't is when they always had a big feud on the tag teams between the Kangaroos and Stomper and Ben Justice. And their matches were just classic. So, Sheik would have his match where, there's a lot of heat and, the fans were just like, ready to riot sometimes. So he figured, if he's got a hot angle going, let's put that tag team bout, so the crowd can die down a little bit and, calm themselves and, get the, forget about, sort of what happened, in the previous bout and concentrate on that tag team bout. So that would be the only times.
Was there doctors in the back to take care of some of these victims after they were sliced up by the Sheik, or was it a situation where they'd have to go to the hospital after if they needed stitches?
No, there was always a doctor there. There was always somebody from the Michigan State Athletic Board there, the commissioner kind of thing. There was all kinds of Michigan politics guys there to get their fingers into the money some way, but they always had a doctor there, and usually when the guys, would juice in the ring or things like that, they'd come back and, some of them were just, a little blood here and there, but then there would be times like, just covered in blood. But, the doctors never did anything. The guys went in the shower and they put their, cream on their head and, a Band-Aid or a piece of tape and went on their merry way to do it again the next night.
Rick Brooks, one of the channel members here, has a good question, which I don't know if you could fully answer, but you probably could. Could you give a timeline of the Sheik's managers? He had a lot of them, but maybe the main ones.
The main ones would have been his wife, Joyce, back in the 50s. She was Princess Salami or Salama, depends on, which magazine, had her name right or wrong. But she would come out in full, regalia, veils and everything. And she would light incense and, the incense would fill, the arena with the smoke. And, the Sheik would do his prayer rug kind of thing. So she was the first. When Sheik bought the territory, and she was doing most of the book work and, the payoffs. And she was like the behinds of the scene person. And she got out of, doing that, because now she had a couple of kids and, she had that duty too. So it went to a guy, Ernie Roth, who the Sheik brought him in as Abdullah Farouk. And Ernie Roth, he was like a weatherman down in Ohio. He did some gigs in Michigan, like he did weather, and he was a disc jockey. And even like prior to Sheik buying the territory, he would do commentary for like in Buffalo. He did it for Pedro Martinez. There was times I saw him, clips of him in Chicago. So he was just Ernie Roth. And even prior to that, he was managing the Magnificent Maurice and Johnny Barron under a whole array of different names. He was Mr. Clean, Armstrong K. He might have had another one that I'm not recollecting at the time. But, in 1965, he was Abdullah Farouk. And then he got a chance to go to New York to work for Vince McMahon Sr. in the WWF. And he went to the East Coast as the Grand Wizard. And mainly he took that because, Ernie or Abdullah, whatever, he only really appeared in Detroit and the TV, tapings, and maybe Toronto. He didn't appear at, shows in Cincinnati and Dayton and Toledo and, Lansing and other spot shows. The only other time he would manage the Sheik is if he went out to like LA or in Hawaii. You can see in the magazines and stuff, great stuff with the Sheik and, Farouk being put up in a cage at the Olympic Auditorium. So there wasn't a lot of work for him, managing at the time. And then, so he had that chance to go to the WWF, and he took that mainly because he was associated with Bob Harmon. And Bob Harmon was a enhancement talent always here in big time wrestling, and they were going to put him over in New York as Beautiful Bob Harmon, or Beautiful Bobby Harmon. And that was the first guy that the Grand Wizard managed there. But every so often he would come back because the next guy in succession, his manager would have been Eddie Creechman, who prior, he was a referee out in Montreal area, I think for the Rougeaus, if I'm not mistaken. And so, and he started doing a little bit of managing. I know he managed Abdullah the Butcher up there also. So the Sheik brought him in as this, nasty, loud talking, obnoxious, manager. So they worked for about 4 or 5 years together. And then, I think Creechman stuck around just, here and there. He would only appear at Kobo shows. He never appeared, that I know of, any show at Maple Leaf Gardens in Toronto because the Tunnies hated him. So then, if the Sheik appeared anywhere, just say, in Kentucky or, down in Atlanta, and then he, went in for the Pafos in Tennessee, back in the early 80s, I think it was. What he did then is like, he had Mike Lauren, who was Porky the Pig here wrestling. He was always the Sheik's, iron fist in a way. His protector always drove him around. So Mike Lauren would always, walk out to the ring with him as a protector. Not as a manager, though. And every so often he'd have somebody else. I think I saw a picture recently of, some other guy who, Lord Alfred Hayes, maybe it was, that, the Sheik had him, walk him out to the ring. And there was also another local guy, the Bug. He would walk out to the ring with them and, a couple times here and there. So he always had that kind of thing. But then in, I think it was 1983, 1984, I was on a show and I was managing the Fabulous Kangaroos at the time, which were Al Costello and Mickey Doyle, and also Malcolm Monroe. And I walked into the dressing room one day and I had no idea, but the Sheik was going to be on the show. So I walked in and it's like, wow, we haven't seen, each other in easily 10, 11 years. So we exchanged pleasantries and, stuff like that. How you doing? And he knew about my managing career and, who I managed. And, he, heard about, what I was doing, once I left big time wrestling. And then the greatest thrill of my life was with him was, he says, "Hey, would you like to manage me?" And I was like, you could have, smacked me down with a feather at that time. It's like, to manage the Sheik, this is a lifelong dream. And sure enough, for like a 2-year period on shows, throughout Michigan, Ohio, and Ontario, whenever the promoters wanted me or whenever the Sheik wanted me with them, I was on those shows with them. And it was the greatest time of my life to manage them. And the difference, a lot of times people ask me about, you manage this guy and this guy, this guy, this guy. All those other guys that I managed, like, the Kangaroos and Malcolm Monroe and Ben Justice and Killer Brooks and, just a plethora of other guys. That was always fun. It was just fun to me to go out there and to, get involved at matches and, take bumps at the end and pop the crowd and stuff. But when you're managing the Sheik, it was a whole different mindset. You had to be spot on. You didn't want to do the stuff you did with other guys because you didn't want to put the focus on yourself outside the ring as a manager. You had to pick your spots. Only because I had been watching the Sheik for over 20 years, I knew, when to distract the referee or to hand him a fake object, that, just the people would go nuts. I didn't have anything. We just made it look like I was handing him something. And so, we were drawing great heat. And then, we were in on the finishes. Sometimes I was involved, sometimes I wouldn't. But then there was like, times, just say Bobo Brazil. We'd do a screw job finish on Bobo. And then I, as a fan, because I was a fan first, and I knew, I loved, watching the managers and what they did. And I knew also, like, I knew what, as a fan, what I wanted to see. So when we would do a screw job thing on Bobo, well, now what's, can't do nothing to the Sheik. So I would get involved. I would let, Bobo, grab me, throw me over the rope, bring me in the ring, Sheik's outside, like, where's my manager? And there Bobo's giving me a headbutt and, beaning me around, tossing me in the corner. I'd do the Ric Flair flip in the corner. And, that would just pop the crowd and they'd forget all about the screw job finish. The manager, and the Sheik got his because his manager, took the heat for him.
Yeah, and we saw that a lot in WWE in later years with Bobby Heenan and Slick getting beat up and those type of situations. There's a fan on here that says he wants to know about the car ride with Field Marshal Homer Odell.
Oh, yeah. That has nothing to do with the Sheik, but when I was working for George Cannon, we'd do trips, from, like, I lived outside of Detroit here and all our shows were up in Canada. So we would meet in Windsor, whatever guys, like there would be Homer Odell, myself, Ricky Cortez, Louis Martinez, just a couple of Frenchie Martin, we'd meet at a designated place. And usually I was, driving. But this one time, Frenchie Martin's driving, and Homer Odell, he dressed his gimmick almost 24 hours a day. He wore that, black, helmet, his leather, everything, and those, riding boots, those leather boots that went up to his, kneecap, everything. So, I'm a young kid back then. I was, let's see, that'd have been 76. So I was like 21 years old. And, I'm riding with these veterans and listening to stories. And, being the young kid, I, kept my ears open and my mouth shut. And this, first time I'm with Homer Odell, and it's like, mercy sake, he pulled, we just get over the border and he pulls out this gun that's like, a foot long out of his boot. And he goes, yeah, anybody tries to mess at me ringside or anything, they're going to bet, holy Jesus, I wouldn't even think of carrying a gun out to the ring. But then, the first, few shows that I saw Homer Odell on, and he didn't last with our promotion too long. he was managing. I used to manage a guy named Blackjack Luca. And at this one show, they had me managing other guys, and they put Homer Odell with Blackjack Luca this night. So Homer Odell, they go through the introductions in the ring. He gets outside, the bell rings. He sits down in a chair, and he falls asleep. And it's like, I'm watching this. It's like, you're not doing anything for this show. And I swear to God, the guy fell asleep. And the only way that he woke up was like at the end, the finish happened and the bell ring, and Homer Odell would, wake up and he'd get in the ring, raise, Rick Lucas' hand and, walk away. He was quite a character. Even Jim Cornette, when me and him talk about Homer Odell, he's got a few stories about him too. He was a loose cannon and somebody that you just didn't want to associate with or be around or get caught in a bad situation with that guy.
I know it's only been about 20 years or so that Canadians and Americans have needed a passport to cross. It used to be a lot easier. I'm guessing in those days, there was no work visas to have to deal with and stuff when you were crossing the border routinely to work in Canada.
No, not at all. I mean, you just, I'd usually go through the Detroit Windsor Tunnel or sometimes over the Blue Water Bridge up in Port Huron. And it's like you'd pay your toll, you'd go across. Where are you going? Oh, I'm going to the wrestling matches. I didn't say I was working. I'm going to the wrestling up in Toronto or London, Ontario, or Kitchener or Hamilton, wherever, we were going. And it's like, you got anything with you? No. It's like at that time, I don't do drugs, never have. I didn't drink at that time, But if I did, I wish I was drinking with Andre the Giant because I'm a big wine guy now. And it's like when I was associated with Andre the Giant, man, that guy was, drinking some fine wines and, cases of beer in one sitting. But yeah, no, you never had any problems crossing the border at all.
Well, since you bring up Andre the Giant, who usually bought everyone around him drinks too, so I guess you missed out there, but your liver is probably thanking you for it. But do you have any stories of Andre you could share with the fans?
Oh, God. A number of times. When he first came to the territory in 1973, I had a big Ford LTD at the time, and the Sheik asked if I'd, take him to all the shows. So he, stuck around, only 2 weeks at a time. He'd, do 2 weeks, he'd go somewhere else, and then he'd come back maybe 4 or 6 months later. He was more of an attraction. He wasn't going to stick around in the territory, for months on end like most of the guys. But there's a classic story that I told, and it's a real long one, so I won't, say it here. But on our Big Time Memory show, on our Andre the Giant episode, I believe it was, I told about me and him driving to Toronto one Sunday morning and having breakfast at this little diner. You'd have to go to our show because it's a really long story and it's really funny. What happened, to eat with Andre the Giant. But then there'd be times that I remember one time we were driving back from Dayton, Ohio after a show. In Ohio at the time, you could buy beer at a bar. You didn't have to go to a, liquor store or, 7-Eleven or, a place like that. You could just go to a bar and, get a case or 2 cases of beer, whatever you wanted, 6-pack, but Andre, sure enough, 2 cases of beer, and it's like, we'd walk into this bar and it's like people looking at him like, most of them weren't wrestling fans, so they had no idea who this guy was. But here's this giant, and then he's walking out with 2 cases of beer and, he can carry the 2 cases by himself, no problem. So from Dayton, Ohio, to a maybe 2.5 hour ride to Toledo, he had already finished those 2 cases of beer. And we're in Toledo, and now it's like, or just outside of Toledo, and it's like 2:30 in the morning. And he goes, "Hey, boss, I need more beer." And it's like, Andre, it's 2:30 in the morning. Where am I going to get beer? There's nothing open around here, and especially off the freeway. "Boss, I need more beer." It's like, Andre, come on. We've only got like another hour to go to get back to Detroit. I want beer. And it's like when he said that out of nowhere, I'm in like the left-hand lane. And it's like, I slowed down a little bit because he's talking to me and I just, wasn't concentrating. A Stroh's beer truck, which is like Stroh's is like the famous beer from Detroit back then. A Stroh's beer truck comes alongside of us. And Andre sees this beer truck and he opens my passenger door and he's waving to the guy to pull over. And I'm sure this driver sees this, big freaky looking guy with this long stringy hair and stuff. It's like, he stepped on the gas and I let him step on the gas. He just got the heck out of there. And Andre, the poor guy, he had to, put up with no more beer, on the way home. But, the sad thing about, that was when we did get back home, I dropped him off at his hotel and it's like, there's a couple times that, we stayed at a hotel on the road too. And the poor guy that he couldn't fit in a normal bed. And he would take the box spring and the mattress and line them up on the floor, so that, he could try to get, some sleep, that way. Just so many stories with Andre, but I'll point fans to our, show a little bit later on when we get a chance, and you can listen to my Andre the Giant breakfast story.
Would he be drinking on the morning trips too? If, let's say, I'm going to guess he probably didn't sleep much on those morning trips since he was probably out all night drinking. But like, say you picked him up at a hotel at 8 a.m. to drive somewhere. Would he want to start drinking that early?
No, I never saw that.
Okay.
Never. He didn't, as far as I know, and when I'd be with him all day long and, through the show and stuff, not until after the show. Maybe in his later years, when he was working for WWE and stuff, maybe he did that kind of stuff. Try to, deaden the pain because he was always in pain and, maybe couldn't sleep and stuff. And I just don't know. I never saw that with him.
And of course, as we wind it down here, the Sheik is known for holding the record for being attacked by fans more than any other wrestler by far. By the time you managed him, kayfabe was starting to be broken, but it was still around a lot more than it is today. And he wasn't at one of his peaks in popularity, but I imagine you may have encountered some situations of fan attacks.
Oh yeah, I've been attacked before a number of times with him and with other guys, and it's like the pennies and nickels that would fly out of the crowd, or the batteries, or walking through under a tunnel kind of thing with fans on the side, beer or some piss that somebody would put in a cup, just so many times. But with him, I always said the longest walk with him was not going to the ring, but trying to get back to the dressing room after, because it's a known, guys tell stories, and I'm sure if you've seen any, Sheik footage or anything like that, when he came out for a bout, all he would have to do is look in, somebody's, direction, or just make a gesture that he was going to attack them. I mean, grown men are flying over seats, 2-3 rows just to get away from him. That's just the impact that he had. But there'd be times that, even during a match, the Sheik is, using a rope or something, illegal, the pencil, a fan could get so, frustrated that, during the match, he could, try to get into the ring and tell the referee or attack the Sheik or something. And even, me, it's like, being out at ringside, fortunately, we had, a good, bodyguards and stuff. Like, good friend of mine, Dennis Wagner and Kenny, Sheik hired them. Any shows that, we were at local, they were right behind our backs and took care of us, going, at ringside to the ring and coming back, one in front of us, one in the back, just protected us, perfectly. I can't thank those two guys enough.
And in more recent years, we've seen Sami Zayn had somebody kicked out for name calling. Seth Rollins got attacked and said it was one of the scariest things of his life. I can't imagine Sheik would have been that rattled by any of these attacks. Would he put them over at all to you after, or would he just be like, "This is just part of
Oh,
the job. I'm not even going to mention"?
Oh, I remember times, a fan would try to attack him at Cobo Arena, and the security, they knew. They took the guy and put him in the back room, and the dressing room, where nobody else was. And when the match was over, and the Sheik would go in there, and the guy came out a little worse for wear. I don't know what happened in there, and the security guards and the police, they just turned their backs on that stuff too. Who knows? Either he roughed him up, could have sliced him a little bit, with the blades that he had on his fingers. You just didn't know. But if you were a fan that tried to take liberties with the Sheik, he'd cut you. He'd cut you with in a heartbeat.
Yeah, that's one of the things about the older wrestlers that they don't really have as much today. Like, that the Sheik is a violent person in real life and has that side to him, so it's easy to believe. He might not be like going around doing this to random people on the streets, but like he has that aura about him that this is a dangerous man. Whereas today, now you can see it's, oh, this guy's playing a character. He's nothing to really be afraid of in real life.
Yeah,
But as you said, when he walked into that office the first time, you were probably a little bit afraid.
Oh yeah. I was, I wasn't afraid that he was going to attack me or anything. But I was just, he just had that presence. You tense up. Anytime the Sheik walked into the room. Even after years after you known him, it's like, oh boy, I hope I didn't do nothing wrong, or he's not going to come after me about, something I wrote in the body press, or, did something wrong or said something wrong, or, who knows? He just had that, command over people.
And I've wrestled Sabu a couple times, and even though he's broken kayfabe because it's a different era and stuff, and didn't achieve the success of the Sheik, which is pretty much impossible to achieve, he kind of has that aura about him too. Like, he's actually a little bit off the wall, and he'll mess you up if you mess with him. I noticed that he took a bit of that from the Sheik.
There has never been, never will be another Sheik in the wrestling, community. It just won't happen. Just with kayfabe being broken, I can't imagine another character Sheik-wise, having, the impact that he had on fans and drawing money and making people believe. I mean, he is by far, to me, the greatest wrestling heel of all time. I can't, there's been some great heels in, the wrestling world over, time, from going back into the 40s and 50s and 60s. And, every, the fans today, the WWE, people and stuff, they don't know wrestling history. And they say, oh, Brock Lesnar, he's the greatest heel of, all time, put him on Mount Rushmore. It's like, you got to be joking me. This guy couldn't hold the Sheik's jockstrap. Name me anywhere, just if you could think of 3 other guys, heels of all time, that would even compare to the Sheik, throw them out. Throw them out to me. I want to hear who, can be comparable. Nobody.
Yeah, I mean, I would say Mad Dog and Abdullah the Butcher aren't close, but they're two that would also have been great heels. But Mad Dog, of course, was a face at various times. But Abdullah certainly was a protege of the Sheik, you could say. But one last question here before we wrap up. This guy's asked it a few times. This story about Louis Martinez having diarrhea with the Sheik, to end it on a comical note.
Do you got time for this story?
Sure.
Okay, we're in Dayton, Ohio that night, and a number of times Louis Martinez would drive with me, but this particular time he didn't. So we're in Dayton. Uh, usually the rule always is you're in the dressing room an hour before showtime. So 7 o'clock comes, no Louis Martinez. 7:30 comes, no Louis Martinez. 8 o'clock comes, show's starting, no Louis Martinez, and it's like, oh. So now it's like 8:30, and now Sheik is, thinking, well, how are we gonna, put another guy, tell the fans that, oh, Louis Martinez missed his plane, so the Sheik is going to be declared the winner. And then you have some guy run out and say, no, 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 I'll challenge him. That's the situation we were facing. So anyway, it was near, I'll say 9:15, Louis Martinez finally shows up. And it's like, oh, the Sheik's ripping him a new behind about, being late and stuff like that. And Louis giving an excuse about, hey, I had trouble with car trouble and stuff. And and Sheik goes, well, come on, hurry up. Let's go get dressed, and, because we're going to be on soon. So I'm sitting there with Louis, and I go, Louis, who'd you drive with? Oh, he ended up hitchhiking there. He couldn't find a ride. And I knew Louis had a few Wiedemann beers, in him, I could just tell. So anyway, now it's like he gets dressed and stuff, and now the Sheik, Louis, and myself, I'm standing there, and Sheik's going over the finish of what's going to happen. So it's like, we got the finish, and Louis goes, Sheik, please, no bumps today, no bumps. I'm sick, I might have the flu or something, so please, no bumps. So Sheik goes, oh, fine, we'll work through it, no problem. So we go out, introductions, everything, and then, all chaos breaks loose. Sheik goes out and he gets the pencil and he's working over Louis for a number of minutes. And then Louis, somehow attacks the Sheik. The pencil goes flying, and Louis, gouging the Sheik. Sheik's bleeding now. The fans are going nuts. And then, for the next couple minutes, it was back and forth. And then at one point, going toward the finish, it was the Sheik throws Louis Martinez outside the ring. And Louis always did this thing where, once he got outside the ring, he would crawl under the ring and pop up on the other side and surprise his opponent. And that was supposed to start our finish. So anyway, we're going. We know it's going to happen. Sheik throws Louis out. Louis gets under the ring. And we're waiting. And we're waiting. And no Louis. And it's like, Sheik comes over to me and says, oh, where's Louis? So let me sort of check. So Sheik, takes the referee and, he's messing with him. And I go look under the ring. And there's Louis in the middle of the ring in a fetal position. He had fallen asleep. He's just out. So I look at that and I go, oh, man, how do I relate this to Sheik now? So Sheik comes over and it's like, Louis is asleep under there. He goes, what? I says, yeah, he's in a fetal position. He's sleeping. So Sheik immediately jumps out, crawls under the ring. So it took like maybe a minute. It seemed like a forever. And it's like they both come out the other side of the ring and they're battling. They're just laying in the blows. And they get back in the ring and they're fighting and fighting and fighting. And it's like now the sort of finish is messed up. And it's like, what are they going to do? So at one point, Louis takes over and he gets the Sheik, sitting in the ring, sitting upright. And he was going to put him in his Indian deathlock. And what that is, the Sheik is, sitting down and Louis puts one leg over his shoulder. He puts the other leg over the other shoulder and he picks his legs up and he yells out, Arriba. Well, that's what's supposed to happen. So anyway, Sheik breaks out of it, so Louis didn't get to do that. So it's like Sheik, picks up Louis and he body slams him. And then Louis with those beers in him, I can see Louis in the middle of the ring shaking, just shaking like hell. And I can read his lips. He goes, don't shit. Don't shit. And it's like, oh, so it's like, oh, Louis doing that. So the Sheik picks him up again. body slams him. And Louis like really shaking and he's like, I can hear him almost. The fans can't hear him, but the fans are going nuts. They're on his side, trying to root him on. But I can see Louis and he's mouthing it big time. Don't shit. Don't shit. So that's when he gets up finally, nails the Sheik, gets him in, sitting again, goes over, puts on that Indian deathlock, and he reaches over and he pulls the Sheik's legs up and he goes, Arriba! And he's pulling and he's pulling. And while he's pulling, I'm watching Louis' trunks. The back of his trunks are starting to inflate like a puffer fish. And it's like, uh-oh. And Louis does it one more time, Arriba! And next thing I know is like, just like an explosion comes out of all of every, leg piece and everywhere, the back part of Louis' trunks. And it's just squirting everywhere. And it's like, oh my God. And then, it's like, Sheik is like, what the hell's going on? And it's like the referee, he doesn't want to go near this. He's like disgusted. And I'm like, what the hell? What's the smell? It's almost like the Leonard Skinner tune. Ooh, that smell. Well, I knew what that smell was. It was Louis Martinez. And the Sheik, looks at this, he's rubbing himself. He goes, he comes out, jumps out of the ring, and he says to me, stall. And it's like, okay. And now the Sheik runs all the way back to the dressing room. And it's like, apparently he ran all the way back to the dressing room. It seemed like a forever, but it's like a minute or two. I'm stalling, I'm taunting Louis Martinez, and, I'm telling the referee, man, don't go anywhere near the center of the ring and fall in that stuff. And then Sheik comes running back. Apparently he went out and, ran under the shower, with all his stuff on, came back in the ring and just like started beating the living hell out of Louis. And then it's like, throws him outside the ring, and they fought all the way back to the dressing room. So it ended up being a double disqualification. As soon as that we all got in the back, Sheik, and Louis get in the dressing room, and Sheik just says, everybody out. And it's like, everybody just like, they're not going to, why? And it's like, no, Sheik says, get out. Everybody got out. And it's like, you can hear just the Sheik just pounding the living hell out of Louis in that dressing room. And then, once, stuff was over, it's like Sheik and Louis, and everybody else, we got back in the dressing room, and I ended up taking Louis home that night. He drove back with me. We had to wait for, the fans to disperse so they couldn't see us. So, Louis walked a little bit, and I finally saw where he was and picked him up. And yeah, he says, yeah, I made a big mistake today. And it's like, it never happened again. I'll tell you that. Yeah, but that was the Louis Martinez pooping on the Sheik story.
And he kept his job.
That's
amazing.
Yeah.
That is absolutely
well. Sheik
amazing.
and Louis went way back. Louis is an old timer. He started wrestling before the Sheik did, and they always had matches and all around the country in the 50s. Louis Martinez would be in Arizona or Texas or California, and he ran across the Sheik. So they were, good compadres for many, many years.
Yeah. Could the fans notice that there was a growing lump in the back of this guy's trunks?
I don't know that they noticed it, but I was like, eye forward, like 10 feet away from it, and I saw it. I doubt if the fans sort of knew, especially with the ones up in, bleacher seats or anything like that. But when that thing exploded, everybody knew something was wrong. It's almost like the, what is it, the UPS guy? What could Brown do for you?
Yeah, that's an insane story. Well, I really appreciate you coming on. Can you share with us some of your current projects that you have going on? I don't think you can talk about it, but I heard you're going to be part of a TV show pretty soon too, doing an appearance on one. So that's pretty good.
Yeah, I did a pre-interview with Vice TV because they're going to be doing exposés on Chris Colt and Abdullah the Butcher. And I talked to them. They did a pre-interview and they liked what they heard. And I sent them some of my photographs from when I was a photographer here, and they loved that. And I had that material. So they're going to be getting a hold of me, sending a film crew over to tape that. But for fans that want to know more about the Detroit big time wrestling territory and history for free, you don't have to buy some bad DVD that somebody keeps plugging, forever and ever, that, just sucks. You can get the history of big time wrestling in Detroit for free. All you have to do is go to Rox TV. That's ROX TV, Big Time Memories, and watch myself and Terry Sullivan. We do like a This Is Your Life on all the, big stars who appeared here. The Sheik and Bobo, Tex McKenzie, Abdullah Butcher, Mark Lewin, just, all the stars. Plus, we also do episodes called Dressing Room Confidential, where we'll tell the Andre the Giant story of, the Breakfast With, some Dr. Jerry Graham stories, stories that just don't fit in a regular episode. So if you go to Rox TV, Big Time Memories, there's a ton of different things there. Watch them, enjoy them, leave a comment, and look me up on our Facebook page on big time wrestling from the 50s, 60s, and 70s and more. Join that. And other than that, I'm always writing and, doing, interviews and trying to, keep the memory of big time wrestling and Detroit wrestling alive. And thanks for having me on here. It's a pleasure.
Oh, I could listen to Sheik stories all day, and I often do here on YouTube, and hopefully we can have you back again sometime. You are a wealth of knowledge, as one of the fans commented, and I'll let you close this off with whatever you want to say.
The Sheik, the greatest wrestling villain in the history of professional wrestling, bar none. That's the way you got to end it. You can't say anything more. The Sheik, the greatest.
Thank you for watching the Hannibal TV. Please like this video if you enjoyed it, and click the subscribe button to not miss any of our latest shoot